to work, keeping all of us here in Western New England better connected to the news, to inspiring music, and to each other. By the way, visit nepm.org to see if your employer matches employee donations. It's a great way to double your support for the programs and services NEPM provides.
You're watching New England Public Media, WGBY Springfield.
I hate the myth of Hemingway. It obscures the man.
His talent is stunning.
He went against the grain.
It's hard to imagine a writer who hasn't been influenced by him.
In order to have something new to write, he had to have something new to live.
And he fell in love quite a few times.
He's complex and deeply flawed, but there he is.
Hemingway, the man, is much more interesting than the myth.
Tune in or stream Hemingway starting April 5th on NEPM.
Coming up, stories we're connecting you with tonight. Congressman Richard Neal on the historic $1.9 trillion COVID relief package.
This is not usurping private sector responsibility. It's acknowledging that the capacity for some institutions to respond to the pandemic would have to come through governmental assistance.
The Eric Carle Museum reopens with a new exhibit examining the civil rights movement through children's books.
How do we have conversations about race with children? And the answer to that is have conversations about race with children. Picture books make that possible.
And celebrating women in leadership.
There are so many little girls out there that now have a vice president of the United States that they can aspire to be.
Details on those stories and more up next on Connecting Point.
Support for Connecting Point is provided by our contributing viewers.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for Connecting Point. I'm 𝗖𝗿𝗶𝗰𝗄. Last Thursday, President Joe Biden signed a historic $1.9 trillion COVID relief package into law, scoring his first major political victory in office. Among its many components, the latest package provides checks of $1,400 to Americans earning less than $75,000 a year. On Capitol Hill, the powerful Ways and Means Committee was responsible for crafting half of the package, totaling a staggering $941 billion. Connecting Point's Ray Hershel spoke with committee chairman Congressman Richard Neal of Springfield, who says the relief package comes at a critical time in the country's battle against COVID.
We are not going to get to full economic recovery until we defeat the virus. And when you consider that in this package, there is money for constituents, there is more money for testing, we expand the child credit, we expand the earned income tax credit, we expand the child care credit, there is the retention tax credit expansion this year, there are more dollars for small business loans. And I think it's important to remember that we are not on the other side of the pandemic. And certainly this package, I believe, will go a long way toward alleviating some of those concerns. There's about $8.5 billion here for the state of Massachusetts, $100 million for the city of Springfield, $115 million for the city of Worcester, $33 million for the city of Pittsfield, I believe $31 million for the city of Holyoke. And I call that up only to point out that during the pandemic, many of the essential workers who took the most risks, they now are still in the precarious position as to whether or not they're going to be able to hold on to their jobs. This will give them a long-term, I think, moment of satisfaction.
Well, it certainly was a comprehensive package, as you just mentioned, and most people are familiar, of course, with the stimulus checks that are going out. $1,400 for individuals earning under $75,000 and $2,800 for individuals earning under $150,000. But that's only about 22% of the total economic stimulus package. So there's 78%, as you mentioned, that goes to other areas, whether it's education, whether it's states, whether it's COVID. So it is a very comprehensive package.
Well, I mean, getting our schools open is essential. And I think that there is money here for our air conditioning systems in the schools. I think that there is money here for those that have been laid off. I think perhaps one of the most important things we did once again in this legislation was to provide the bedrock guarantee of expanded and extended unemployment insurance through the fall. These are very critical considerations. I think the multi-employer pension plan relief that we undertook was also essential. So this is, by most, I think, measurements, perhaps on par with what Lyndon Johnson did in 64 and 65 and what Franklin Roosevelt did back in 32 and 33. This is not usurping private sector responsibility. It's acknowledging that the capacity for some institutions to respond to the pandemic would have to come through governmental assistance.
Now, after the stimulus package was signed into law, you talked with President Biden. I'm curious, could you share what the gist of that conversation was, what he told you and what you responded to for the president?
So I talked to the president for about 10 minutes. He was elated, congratulated me over and over again for what we were able to get done. 10 million jobs that were lost during this pandemic. It's a little bit more than 1 year old now. 10 million jobs. They've not come back. So even though the national unemployment rate is advertised a little north of 6%, Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, she's made it clear that that number is closer to 10% because of the number of people who stopped looking.
Republicans have maintained that there's too much in this bill, too much money. They propose an alternative bill, I think, of about a third the amount. In terms of what this means for the federal deficit expanding and long-term economic growth in our country, how do you feel this COVID relief package is going to fare?
The Federal Reserve has made clear that getting to the other side of the pandemic should be priority number one. Time and again, Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, as recently as a couple of days ago, has pointed out that he intends to keep interest rates low for the foreseeable future. Some speculate that means years to come. He's trying to get to that inflation number of 2%. This is a tough call. It's like a bank shot if you've ever played pool. And he's, I think, an authoritative voice on this. I think he's done a really good job. However, there is the reality in front of us that it would be very hard for Republicans now, and this is I think, a diplomatic critique of their positions. You can't be just for deficit reduction when there's Democratic presidents. And I think it's fair to say that the debt exploded under President Bush Jr. and under Donald Trump. President Trump took the position, if you remember, that the Republican proposal for the $600 checks was not enough. He wanted $2,000 checks. And the last American president who paid great attention to the deficits and debt was Bill Clinton. Since that time, I think that there's been an acknowledgement that for long-term investments, some borrowing is appropriate. But Clinton balanced the budget 4 times during his presidency. It's only been balanced 5 times since the end of World War II.
And if we could look forward just a little bit at this particular point in terms of what lies ahead, of course, we're dealing with COVID, will be for some time now. What's the next major initiative that's going to be coming through Ways and Means that the president is espousing at this point of view? Is it the infrastructure bill?
It looks as though it's going to be infrastructure. We right now have begun those discussions. I've had that conversation with Speaker Pelosi in her office a couple of days ago. We've talked about it extensively. I think there's a broad acknowledgement that America's infrastructure has fallen into a broad state of disrepair. Our airports and our railroads are two that come to mind, but we want to expand this to more broadband opportunities. We want to expand it to sewer and water, perhaps some assistance for school building with a maintenance of effort from local and state governments. I have talked extensively about trying to improve rail service between Boston, Worcester, Springfield, and Pittsfield. And I think that that is a distinct possibility as well. So Donald Trump proposed a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Joe Biden, I expect, to propose a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. And I'm okay with a considerable amount of borrowing for that, because I think that's a long-term investment. There aren't many people, excuse me, there aren't many people who buy their home with one payment. You invest over the long period of time, increasing productivity, which then in turn improves the quality of life.
Every Friday night, Connecting Point explores the people, places, and ideas that matter most to Western New England. But it doesn't stop there. You can find us online anytime for exclusive features and content, including our look at the Keystone Arches of the Berkshires, recently designated as a prestigious National Historic Landmark by the U.S. Department of the Interior.
He was surveying on horseback. They were doing things like building towers so they could see over the trees, lighting fires at night on the next hillside so they could spot, where they were heading and stuff when they were surveying. It's pretty innovative.
Don't miss this digital exclusive available online right now at nepm.org/connectingpoint. The Eric Carle Museum has opened its doors once again. After remaining closed over the winter due to spikes in COVID-19 cases across Massachusetts, the Carle debuts its newest exhibit while working to keep visitors safe. Connecting Point's Ross Lipman visited the museum on opening day and shows us the story behind the exhibition Picture the Dream, the story of the civil rights movement through children's books.
The signs pointing to the Eric Carle Museum in Amherst have for months led to an empty parking lot, which is once again being filled with families eager to return. On March 11th, the Carle reopened for in-person visiting. The timing of this reopening not lost on the museum. The date marking 1 year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic.
It feels like a kind of triumphant moment 1 year later to be here. And I think we've all been reflecting a lot on what it was like a year ago.
The Picture Book Museum will be open Thursday through Sunday with a limited capacity and many of the standard COVID-related protocols we've all come to know. Face masks, social distancing, and checklists guests must meet in order to visit.
There are very specific state guidelines that we can follow. What our cleaning protocols are here, how many people can come here in a day. We follow all the state guidelines for that.
For a museum catering to children, many of the restrictions in place can create barriers for how children best learn. In spaces like the art studio, the Carle is trying to find the right balance, knowing that for many families, it's the first time they've been in a museum or out of the house in months.
Visitors who come to the Carle now are given an activity bag, which is their own, set of tools and paper and writing utensils so that they can do things and feel safe in the gallery, but they're not sharing a lot of paper and utensils back and forth.
At the center of the Carle's reopening is a new exhibit titled Picture the Dream, the story of the civil rights movement through children's books. It's a project that has been years in the making between the Carle and the High Museum of Art in Atlanta.
This is actually the 5th exhibition we've worked on with the High, and it was a topic that both institutions knew we wanted to present. One thing we knew in talking about this was that we really needed to find the right curator who could put this exhibition together.
Over 40 artists contributed to the exhibit, which explores the civil rights movement through the lens of children and children's stories, depicting the historic figures of the movement and its events, from Bloody Sunday and the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the Black Lives Matter movement today. The exhibit was guest curated by New York Times best-selling author and Coretta Scott King Book Award winner Andrea Davis Pinkney.
Well, I come to the role as guest curator kind of wearing many hats. I am first and foremost a mom. I've raised children. I'm a children's book author, a children's book publisher, and someone who cares deeply about civil rights, social justice. I'm also a daughter. I'm a daughter of civil rights foot soldiers.
Picture the Dream also confronts the difficulty many families face in talking about systemic racism with children, something Davis Pinkney says is part of the magic of picture books.
People often ask, how do we have conversations about race with children? And the answer to that, from my perspective, is the way we have conversations about race with children is to have conversations about race with children. Picture books make that possible.
The exhibit can be seen at the Carle through July 3rd, and the museum hopes it won't be closing again due to the pandemic.
Yeah, we hope that everybody continues to be able to keep these COVID numbers down, do the right thing for everybody, and that we and all the other museums around the state can stay open.
March is Women's History Month, and 𝗵𝗵𝗃 University, Springfield Museums, and Unity First recently held their annual On the Move Forum this year, examining the past, present, and future of women in leadership. I spoke with forum organizers Janine Fondon, chair of the Undergraduate Communications Department at 𝗵𝗵𝗃, and Dr. Andrea Hickson Martin, the Graduate Program Coordinator for Elementary and Early Childhood Education, to discuss the insights found and lessons learned regarding the role of women in leadership in America.
One of the concerns actually was in the top three was the issue of the pandemic, how it has more widely impacted women versus men. And that appears to have been that women were being expected to continue their work in their place of employment via Zoom or remotely, but also they were managing home life. You know, their kids may have been home, they were homeschooling, they were having to take care of the home outside of just the schooling. So they were balancing many things. So without a doubt, the pandemic definitely impacted women.
Now, I know many discussions took place during the forum, as you mentioned, with the pandemic. What other things came to light as a result of these talks?
That there isn't enough mentorship focused for women, women supporting women. You know, we need to have a better sisterhood in our community. And as women, we need to lift each other up as opposed to pushing each other down. Another disparity was around salary, and that being an obstacle, that there's the huge difference between what a male makes versus a female. And then, as I stated, the pandemic has impacted women more, and also history. History has shown that it has been a white male-driven society with traditional beliefs and education myths about, you know, men being better at math than women was another theme that came out. And also, of course, the lack of childcare for women, and also adult aging parent care tends to fall on females more than men.
The national statistics also support all that we found. And there was one quote by President Doran of 𝗵𝗵𝗃 University, who said that there was an IBM study, she quoted an IBM study, that C-suites around the country and world still have made not much progress since 2019. And also there was another study quoted that, again, as Andrea had mentioned, that, you know, Black women and women of color are often the lowest paid, the less promoted, less, recognized for their work and, diligence in the workplace. So there are a lot of national statistics that justify all that we found.
Now, the spotlight often gets shined on women on the national stage, but what are some of the contributions we are seeing locally from women?
We have some really strong representation of women in higher education in this area. You know, with our own president, Sandra Doran, president of 𝗵𝗵𝗃, you know, I can think of Dr. Mary Beth Cooper from Springfield College. We've got Holyoke Community College is being run by a female. What I would like to see is more women of diverse backgrounds in those roles, but we've got some great examples of women in leadership right here in our own backyard.
Yes. And also when you think of, I'm so glad you mentioned that around education, Andrea, because we had with us 𝗫𝗏 Gaynor, who leads the African American Female Professors Organization, which is a relatively new organization, but it's supposed to, really function to raise the level of engagement with women professors. And if we look at that statistic, I believe it's like less than 3% of your full-time professors are women of color.
Nationally, we have seen an increased presence of women in leadership roles, most notably being the election of the first female vice president. What is the impact of Kamala Harris?
I just remember that, I had chills that evening when we finally announced, right, that the Biden-Harris ticket had won. I just thought that there are so many little girls out there that now have a vice president of the United States that they can aspire to be and be just like. It just is incredible. I mean, again, we have so much more that we need to do to level the playing field, but this was definitely a step in the right direction.
What we have to remember with her, rise to that role, I think it's also coming with the fact that there's a lot of work to do. So I, as much as, we are all focused on, that it's great to see her. I love when she says she will be the first, but she may not be the last, which is great. And understanding that what I think she represents is the fact that, we have work to do. When our voices appear in spaces, it's about doing the work. So I appreciate that. And, it's wonderful when we can see history in the making. But as we see her, we see everyone across our communities, especially those women who are out there, doing what they need to do to create changes.
We acknowledge what the obstacles were, but there were action steps that all the groups came up with. What do we need to do as women? We need to offer each other mentorship, networking, partnerships. We need to use, and I myself, as a white woman, I need to use my privilege as being a white woman to help others, not to exclude, to be an advocate, to support, for systemic change to occur. And we need to claim, as women, we need to claim what is ours and have self-belief and not fall into the imposter syndrome, and know that we can step into our power.
Where there is a river, there are floodplains, and where there are floodplains, there is fertile soil. And for centuries, farmers have taken advantage of this. It's why so many farm fields can be found throughout the Connecticut River Valley. But many of those farm fields have been vacated for years and have the potential to return to the floodplain forest that they were before farmers cleared them. Connecting Point's Brian Sullivan met up with several environmental groups this past fall during their efforts to restore one of those forests in the meadows of Northampton.
Heavy cloud cover hangs over the Northampton Meadows on Old Springfield Road as more than 20 volunteers take to the task of repopulating this former farmland with rows of trees. How many trees? Well, somewhere in the neighborhood of 900, spread out over 4 acres and done within roughly 4 hours' time. This floodplain forest restoration project is a collaborative effort between Mass Audubon, the Nature Conservancy, and the Mass Division of Ecological Restoration, with Land Stewardship Incorporated as the contractor managing the installation.
We've been planning this project for over 4 years, and it's been delayed for various reasons, of course the pandemic among others, and just to be able to get everybody out here working to help us install these plants is just really heartwarming.
The wet and muddy conditions may not have seemed so wonderful for any of the volunteers hoping to stay clean and dry. But as far as trees being planted is concerned, those conditions were nearly perfect. Because the Connecticut River cuts through so much of western Massachusetts, floodplain areas like this one here are not uncommon throughout the region along the river's path. And what they offer is soil that's stone-free and rich with nutrients, ideal for regrowing a forest, or as history has shown, growing crops.
For hundreds of years, this was prime farmland even for the earliest European settlers, and it was even used by Native Americans prior to European settlement of the area. So the Northampton Meadows have been open for centuries, and 𝗥𝗲𝗄𝗏 Wildlife Sanctuary hosts some of the finest examples of floodplain forest anywhere in the state. And we thought we could grow that forest block out by just taking some of our fields and putting them back into trees.
The last time we looked at a project like this was back in early spring of 2019 at Fanny Stebbins. Now, a big difference between the two is that this one features much fewer trees, with only about 2,000 going into the ground in this first phase. But there are still plenty of similarities to go around. Each location has sections that are visible from the highway. In fact, drivers passing on 91 up through this Northampton stretch here have probably seen this field flooded out in the spring. That's why planting the trees now is paramount. The 2019 Stebbins project in Longmeadow was much bigger in scope and size, and not just in the number of trees, but in budget and time frame compared to the one here. This is essentially a 2-day project covering 8.5 acres for the 2,000 plantings. And with a much smaller budget, volunteers become the driving force in completing the task, many of whom are first-timers. This makes a prep course ahead of time necessary so that everyone is on the same page. But limitations aside, each new undertaking in the area provides a learning curve to possibly do something better or more efficient than the one before it.
One of the big differences that I see here that's I think going to be really helpful is they put the deer protection in as they're doing the planting. So they've got some electric fences, they've got some wire cages, and I think that will really help their survival rate, the trees.
Lombard was instrumental in heading up that project in Longmeadow with the Nature Conservancy. And although the TNC was a partner in this endeavor, today she was just joining the dozens of others here as an unpaid helping hand.
I'm really passionate about this, and I like to do this in my free time as well as professionally, and it's kind of fun to be on the planting end instead of on the project management side.
That does it for Connecting Point for March 19th, 2021. Remember, you can always find the stories that you saw tonight, as well as exclusive features, digital-only content, and more online anytime at nepm.org/connectingpoint. And please join us again next Friday at 6 right here on New England Public Media for more stories of the people, places, and ideas that matter most to Western New England. I'm 𝗖𝗿𝗍. Be safe and have a good night.
Support for Connecting Point is provided by our contributing viewers.
Many call her writing Southern Gothic. Flannery O'Connor.
Flannery's writing is all about original sin, about the human condition. What a mess we are.
She saw the mystery of the craziness.
Look for Flannery
to reveal a mystery
on American Masters.
Tune in or